The air in the room was thick with the smell of stale coffee and betrayal. My husband, Mark, sat across from me, a stranger in his own home, across the very table where we'd planned futures that would now never exist. Next to him, perched on the edge of the sofa like a nervous bird ready for flight, was Chloe, his secretary. Her name felt like ash on my tongue. The late afternoon sun, usually casting a warm glow across our living room, felt cold and judgmental through the window. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the stillness, tiny particles of a life disintegrating before my eyes. My hands rested on my lap, palms damp, a faint tremor running through my fingers I couldn't stop. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. I could hear the frantic thumping of my own heart, a trapped bird against my ribs. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the seismic shift happening within these four walls. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Not like this. Not here. Not now. The words he'd just spoken hung in the air, heavy and foul. I'm leaving you. I'm in love with Chloe. Simple. Brutal. Final. And she sat there, small and quiet, a human period at the end of my sentence. My gaze flickered between their faces, his, etched with a pathetic mix of guilt and relief, hers, carefully neutral, a mask poorly fitted over something smug. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass of the window, to burn the furniture. Instead, I just sat, paralyzed in the quiet hum of my own implosion. If you've ever had a moment where the ground gave way beneath you, where everything you thought was solid just wasn't, tell me about it in the comments below. I read all of them. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Our life, before this moment, felt like a carefully constructed ship sailing on calm seas. We had a routine, a rhythm. Mornings started with coffee and the rustle of newspapers or the quiet glow of tablets, a shared glance over the rims of mugs. Evenings ended with the familiar weight of him beside me in bed, the soft sounds of sleep filling the darkness. Mark was Mark. Stable. Predictable. An engineer with a quiet focus, a man who built things, both physically in his job and, I thought, our life together. He wasn't prone to grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements. Our love wasn't a roaring fire. It was a steady, comforting warmth, a well-banked fire providing reliable heat through the long nights. I felt safe. I felt seen. In the quiet way he'd notice my favorite tea was low, or how he'd remember a small detail I'd mentioned weeks ago. I worked too. I wasn't just the wife, I was a digital consultant, a job that lived mostly in the abstract, in lines of code and marketing strategies. It was demanding, fluid, constantly changing. Mark's world was solid, tangible, bridges, buildings, structures that stood against the wind and rain. Mine was ethereal, built on data and algorithms. We were different, but we fit. Like two pieces of a puzzle, interlocking imperfectly, but holding together. Our apartment felt like a physical manifestation of that life, high up above the city, windows overlooking the sprawling landscape, a quiet sanctuary away from the noise. It was spacious, filled with light, decorated with pieces collected over the years, each holding a memory. The armchair we fought over, the painting we spontaneously bought on a weekend trip, the worn edges of the coffee table where countless meals had been shared. It wasn't just an apartment. It was the container of our shared history, the silent witness to a decade of waking up together, falling asleep together, navigating the mundane and the monumental hand in hand. I poured my energy into building my career, into nurturing our home, into being a good partner. I envisioned a future here, in these rooms, growing old together, maybe with the laughter of grandchildren echoing down the hall eventually. It was a simple dream, perhaps, but it was our dream. Or so I believed. The disruption arrived not with a bang, but with a whimper. A gradual, almost imperceptible cooling. He was working late more often. The shared glances over coffee became rarer. The comfortable silence in the evenings felt less comforting, more empty. When I asked, he was vague, stressed about work, deadlines, projects. I accepted it. His job was demanding. I understood. I gave him space. I tried to be supportive. I made his favorite meals. I listened when he did talk about work stresses. I told myself it was just a phase, a busy period, that things would return to normal once his big project wrapped up. I blamed the city, the pressure, the relentless pace of modern life. I blamed everything but the one thing that was actually happening right under my nose. Then came the day that ripped the veil away. He came home early, which was unusual. He looked pale, drawn. He didn't meet my eyes. He just stood there for a moment in the hallway, key still in his hand, the familiar click of the lock feeling unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet of the apartment. I was in the living room, working on my laptop, the gentle evening light just beginning to soften the edges of the room. I looked up, smiled, asked if everything was okay. He swallowed hard, his throat working. And then he said the words. Not shouted, not whispered, just stated, flat and lifeless, as if reading from a script he hadn't memorized. We need to talk. The cliché struck me even then, a tiny flicker of dark humor in the rising tide of dread. People only say we need to talk when the talking is already over. He walked into the living room, but he didn't sit near me. He chose the armchair across the room, putting distance between us. A gulf wider than the city outside our window opened up in that moment. And he told me he wasn't happy. He told me he hadn't been happy for a long time. The words felt like stones dropping into a deep well, each one echoing the emptiness he claimed defined our marriage. Then he said her name. Chloe. He said he'd fallen in love with her. His secretary. Younger, I knew. Quieter, I assumed. The kind of woman men like Mark often seem to gravitate towards when they're looking for something else. Something simpler, perhaps, than the complex partnership we had built. The initial shock was a physical blow. Air left my lungs. My vision blurred at the edges. My mind, usually sharp and analytical, simply stopped. I couldn't process it. This wasn't our script. This wasn't the story we were writing. This was a sudden, violent rewrite by someone else entirely. I remember trying to speak, but only a choked sound came out. He kept talking, filling the silence with justifications, with platitudes about needing to be true to himself, about how this wasn't my fault, about how I deserved to be with someone who could make me truly happy. The hypocrisy was staggering. He was destroying my happiness while claiming to want me to find it. He talked about logistics, about separating finances, about selling the apartment. The apartment. Our home. He spoke of it like a piece of furniture to be disposed of. That hurt almost as much as the infidelity. In the days and weeks that followed, I moved through life in a haze. The apartment felt alien. Every corner held a memory that now felt tainted, a lie. The smell of his cologne on a forgotten scarf, the indent in the pillow where his head had rested, the way the light hit the walls at a certain time of day, it all screamed his absence, his betrayal. I tried to function. I logged into work, but the words on the screen swam. Emails went unanswered. Deadlines blurred. My colleagues noticed. Concerned messages popped up in my inbox, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you explain that the foundation of your life just crumbled, and the man you trusted implicitly was the one who kicked out the supports? He was still in the apartment, intermittently. He'd come to collect things, always when I wasn't there, or when I was holed up in the spare room, unable to face him. Each visit felt like a violation. The air would shift, the energy change. I'd find new gaps in the bookshelves, empty hangers in the closet, a void where his presence used to be. It was like watching my life being systematically dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. I tried talking to him, pleading initially, hoping to reach the man I thought I knew. Tears streamed down my face as I begged him to reconsider, to think about what we had, about the history, the commitment. He was polite, distant, like talking to a customer service representative explaining a policy change. He kept repeating that he was sorry, but this was what he needed to do. He kept mentioning Chloe, how happy she made him, how easy it was with her. Each mention was a fresh stab wound. My attempts to reason, to appeal to the shared life we had built, bounced off a wall of detachment I hadn't known he possessed. It was like finding out you'd been married to a hologram. Friends rallied, in their way. Offers of spare rooms, endless cups of tea, platitudes about time healing all wounds. But they couldn't fill the void. They couldn't understand the specific, icy grip of this kind of betrayal, the way it made you question your entire history, your own judgment. Was it always a lie? Was I just too blind, too trusting to see it? I felt stupid. Naive. A fool who had built her castle on quicksand. The vulnerability was terrifying.
I felt exposed, stripped bara.
The future, once a clear path stretching ahead, was now a terrifying, foggy landscape. I didn't know where to go, what to do. The apartment, my sanctuary, felt like a cage, a constant reminder of what I had lost and who had taken it. I started avoiding certain rooms, certain pieces of furniture. The couch where they sat that day became a forbidden zone. The table where he broke me became a monument to my devastation. I ate standing up in the kitchen or curled on a different chair, just to avoid the ghosts. One particularly bad day, I was sitting on the floor in the spare room, surrounded by boxes I couldn't bring myself to unpack or pack, staring blankly at a wall. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Mark's lawyer. Short, formal, stating his intent to initiate divorce proceedings and requesting access to financial documents for asset division, specifically mentioning the apartment. The apartment. Again. It hit a nerve, a raw, exposed nerve. He was treating our home like a line item on a spreadsheet, like a thing to be split, negotiated, fought over. The sheer audacity of it, after what he had done after bringing her into our space, made something inside me snap. It wasn't a sudden surge of anger, not at first. It was colder, sharper, like the click of a lock. A clear, chilling thought formed in the quiet desperation of the spare room. He wanted to talk about the apartment? He wanted to talk about asset division?
Fine.
Let's talk about the apartment. Let's talk about ownership. Let's talk about who, exactly, had the right to decide its fate. In that moment, huddled on the floor amidst the debris of my shattered life, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the grieving wife, the heartbroken victim packing her bags and quietly disappearing. I wasn't going to let him dismantle my life and stride off into his new, happy future with Chloe, leaving me with nothing but the ashes. He wanted a fight? He had won. But it wasn't going to be the fight he expected. Things started to shift after that day. The haze didn't entirely lift, but a new layer settled over it, a layer of cold, calculated focus. I stopped staring blankly at walls. I started making calls. Not to friends for comfort, but to lawyers, to financial advisors, to people who understood contracts, property law, digital forensics. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planning. I started putting the pieces of my life back together, but not in the way they were before. This time, I was building an armor, a strategy, a trap. The husband and the secretary, meanwhile, seemed to grow bolder. They became a unit, visible now, no longer hiding. I heard rumors. They were seen at restaurants we used to frequent. Chloe even changed her social media profile picture to one of them together, a smiling, public declaration of their affair that felt like a deliberate taunt. Mark's messages became less apologetic, more demanding. He started pressuring me to move out of the apartment, claiming it was awkward, that they needed to move forward. They needed to move forward. As if my life was just an obstacle in the path of their newfound bliss. He suggested I find a smaller place, maybe something temporary while the divorce was finalized. His tone was dismissive, patronizing. He spoke to me as if I were a child who needed to be told what to do. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had taken everything, and now he wanted me to neatly package up what was left and hand it over without a fuss. I played along. I nodded on the phone, mumbled noncommittals. Yes, Mark. I understand. I'll think about it. Inside, I was building. Each call, each email, each legal consultation was another brick in the wall I was constructing around him, around them. My work, which had suffered initially, became a refuge, a place where my analytical mind could find purchase, where I could control variables and predict outcomes. I applied that same ruthless logic to my personal life. I started digging. Not just into Mark's infidelity, which was obvious enough, but into his finances, his professional life, their interactions at work. My digital skills, my knowledge of data, of tracing information trails, they became my weapons. There's a certain power in knowing things others think are hidden. There are no secrets online, not really. Just information waiting for the right key. The challenges mounted. Mark's lawyer sent more aggressive emails, hinting at legal action if I didn't cooperate with the asset division timelines they proposed. They were assuming control, dictating terms. They were confident, arrogant even. They saw me as a hurdle, an emotional mess who would eventually buckle under pressure. Chloe even called me once. Her voice was saccharine, apologetic, talking about how hard this was for everyone, how she hoped we could all be adults about it. The sheer hypocrisy made me want to laugh, a dry, bitter sound that wouldn't come out. She was living in my apartment, sleeping with my husband, and calling me to ask me to be an adult? I hung up without saying a word. The silence on the line felt louder than any scream. It felt like everything was closing in. Friends started giving up on me, tired of my inability to just move on. Family offered well-meaning but useless advice. The financial pressures began to bite. Mark started making it difficult to access joint funds, a petty but effective tactic to exert control and pressure me to agree to his terms. There were days the fear was a cold knot in my stomach, days I woke up trembling, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was strong enough to see this through. What if his lawyers were too good? What if I had missed something? What if, despite everything, he still won? The weight of it all was immense. It felt like I was drowning, pulled under by the tide of his betrayal and their combined indifference. All the planning, all the secret work, seemed fragile against the onslaught of their confidence and control. It felt like I was losing badly. The apartment, their temporary love nest, loomed large in my mind, a symbol of my defeat. But every time the fear threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered Chloe's condescending call, Mark's dismissive tone, the way they looked at me that first day, like something inconvenient that needed to be swept away. I remembered the decade I had invested, the future I had believed in, reduced to a negotiation over furniture. And the cold resolve would solidify again. They saw me as weak, heartbroken, easily manipulated. They saw me as the ex-wife, soon to be homeless, replaced. They were so focused on their own narrative, their own desired outcome, they never once considered that I might have a narrative of my own. A different story entirely. A story where I wasn't the victim. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic event, but a quiet click into place. I had gathered everything I needed. The legal paperwork was in order. The financial trails had been followed. The ducks were, as they say, in a row. I stood by the large window in the living room one evening, watching the city lights flicker on, mirroring the slow, steady beat of my own heart. The apartment was quiet. Mark wasn't here tonight. He was likely with her, in some restaurant, some bar, building their new life on the ruins of mine. The thought no longer brought a wave of pain, but a sense of detached readiness. I looked around the room, at the familiar objects, the walls that had held so much love and laughter, and then so much pain and silence. This was my space, my home, and it was time to reclaim it. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was dwarfed by a powerful, exhilarating surge of determination. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about reclaiming my dignity, about showing them that I was not a footnote in their story, but the author of my own. I picked up my phone. It was time to invite them over. Time for one last conversation. Time to show them the ending they never saw coming. I asked them to come to the apartment. Mark seemed surprised, hesitant. He probably expected tears, hysterics, another round of pleading. I kept my voice flat, calm. We need to finalize things, Mark. Paperwork. It's easier here, he agreed, likely seeing it as an opportunity to push me further on moving out, to get things done on his terms, in what he clearly considered his territory now. He said he'd bring Chloe. Of course he would. They were a package deal now. He probably thought her presence would make me uncomfortable, give him an edge.
Good.
Let him think that. They arrived on a Tuesday evening. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, nothing special, just a simple, professional dress, and walked to the door. They stood there, side by side, looking like a corporate power couple, ill-fitting in the hallway of my home. Mark managed a tight, awkward smile. Chloe offered a small, insincere-looking wave. I stepped aside, motioned them in.
Come in.
Let's go to the living room. They settled onto the couch, my couch, the same one they sat on that first day. They looked comfortable, entitled. Chloe glanced around, a proprietary air about her. Mark leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, already adopting a negotiation stance. The setting was perfect, familiar, yet charged with unspoken history and impending confrontation. I remained standing for a moment, observing them. They looked confident.
Smug.
They were ready to finalize their victory, to sweep me out of their way. So, Mark started, his voice attempting a tone of reasonable finality. I think we should discuss the timeline for you moving out. Chloe and we'd like to settle in properly. Chloe nodded, adding softly, yes, it would be so much easier for everyone if we could just transition smoothly. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I wasn't angry anymore. Just ready. I walked over to the coffee table, not the monument to pain anymore, but a stage prop. On it I had placed a single slim file folder. I picked it up. Their eyes followed my movements, a flicker of curiosity mixed with impatience. Moving out, I repeated, my voice low and steady. That's an interesting suggestion, Mark. He shifted, a hint of annoyance entering his expression. Yes, well, it is the logical next step. Once the divorce is finalized, we'll obviously sell the apartment, but frankly, it's untenable for you to remain here indefinitely. Sell the apartment, I said again, testing the words. They sounded alien coming from them. Yes, Chloe interjected, her voice a little too bright. It's a lovely place, of course, prime location. It should fetch a good price. I looked at her, really looked at her, saw the casual entitlement in her eyes, the assumption that my home was just a commodity for her and Mark to trade. A small, cold smile touched my lips. You seem to think you have a say in that, I said. Mark frowned. Of course I do. It's a marital asset. Is it? I asked, my voice still quiet. The quietness seemed to unnerve them more than shouting would have. Don't be difficult, Mark said, his tone hardening. We've been through this. We'll split the proceeds. It's standard procedure. I opened the file folder. I didn't need to look at the documents inside. I knew them by heart. The warranty deed, the purchase agreement, the bank statements. Proof. Undeniable, unassailable proof. Standard procedure applies when assets are marital, I said, pulling out a single sheet of paper. But this apartment, Mark, it's not a marital asset. His frown deepened. What are you talking about? We bought it together, years ago. Chloe was watching me now, her head tilted, a wary look in her eyes. No, Mark, I said softly, holding up the paper. You didn't. I bought it. Silence. Heavy, absolute silence. The city hum outside seemed to fade away. Their eyes widened, first Mark's, then Chloe's. Disbelief warred with confusion on their faces. That's ridiculous, Mark stammered. I was there. We signed the papers. You were there, I conceded, my voice gaining a little strength now, the power of the truth flowing through me. You were my fiancé at the time. You came with me to the closing. You even picked out the paint color for the bedroom. But you didn't sign the purchase agreement. You didn't put down the deposit. Your name, I tapped the document, is not on the deed. Mine is. Solely. I watched their faces as the reality sank in. Mark's face went from confusion to shock, and then, slowly, to a dawning horror. Chloe paled, her composure cracking. But where did you get the money? Mark stammered. We didn't have that kind of money back then. You didn't, I corrected him. I did. An inheritance from my grandmother. The one you always forgot I mentioned. The one you weren't interested in hearing about because it involved stocks and bonds and boring financial talk. I remembered his eyes glazing over whenever the subject came up, his quick change of subject to his latest engineering project. He was so focused on his own world, he never bothered to truly understand mine or where my resources came from. I used that money that was solely mine, to buy this apartment outright before we were married, I explained, keeping my voice steady, factual. I put it in my name. My lawyer advised it at the time, given the nature of the inheritance. We decided to live here after the wedding because it made sense. It was already furnished, in a great location. You never asked for your name to be added to the deed. You never contributed to the mortgage because there wasn't one. You contributed to the utilities, the groceries, the shared expenses of living together, yes. But not to the ownership of the property itself. I saw the blood drain from Mark's face. Chloe's hand went to her mouth. The smug confidence they arrived with was evaporating like mist in the sun. No, that's not right, Mark whispered, shaking his head. That can't be right. We always said our apartment. Our home. We did, I agreed, stepping closer to the coffee table, putting the document down so they could see it clearly, even though they couldn't bring themselves to look too closely. Because that's what it was to me. Our home. The place we built our life. But legally, financially, it's mine. Bought with my money, titled in my name. It is not a marital asset subject to division. Mark stared at the document, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief.
You
let me believe. All this time? You never asked, I said simply. You assumed. You assumed you knew everything. You assumed your name was on everything. You assumed I was just part of your life, without an independent foundation. Chloe finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. But we've been living here. You can't just kick us out. I turned my gaze to her. For the first time, I felt no anger, no jealousy. Just a profound sense of disconnect. She was an inconvenience, a temporary glitch in my life's code. Actually, I said, picking up another paper from the folder. A carefully worded legal notice, delivered by my lawyer that morning. I can. And I am. This is a notice to vacate. You have 30 days. Mark gasped. A strangled, choked sound. 30 days. That's impossible. We have nowhere to go. That, I said, my voice firm now, the dry humor finally surfacing, is no longer my problem. Just as my happiness, my future, and my home stopped being yours the moment you decided to build a new life with Chloe. Mark surged forward slightly on the couch, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and panic. You snake. You planned this. You let me make plans. You let us think. He trailed off, sputtering, unable to articulate the depth of his being blindsided. He had been so sure he held all the cards, that the division of assets, including the apartment, would be entirely on his terms, a standard divorce negotiation where he, the betrayer, still held the power because he assumed he controlled the finances, or at least half of the major assets. His entire strategy, his leverage, his confidence in dictating my future, it all hinged on the assumption of shared ownership. And I had just pulled the rug out from under him with a single sheet of paper. The realization that he had walked away from our marriage, brought his mistress into my apartment, and now faced not a comfortable asset split, but potential homelessness because he had been too arrogant and too oblivious to understand his own living situation, hit him like a physical blow. Chloe was silent, watching him with wide, frightened eyes. Her new, comfortable life, built on the foundation of my old one, was crumbling in real time. She had likely envisioned moving seamlessly into the marital apartment, setting up house, playing the lady of the manor. Instead, she was looking at 30 days to find somewhere else to live with a man who was now staring at me as if I were a monster, because he had been the fool.
The screaming started then.
Not a controlled shout, but a raw, animal sound of pure, unadulterated shock and rage. Mark leaped off the couch, gesticulating wildly. You can't do this. I'll fight you.
I'll
ruin you. I stood my ground unfazed. His threats were empty. He had nothing to fight me with, not where it counted. Ruin me, Mark?
How?
You just tried to ruin me by taking my life, my marriage, and my home. Turns out, you only managed 2 of the 3. The apartment, like my career and my independence, is my own. I gestured towards the door. 30 days. The locks will be changed on day 31. I suggest you find somewhere else to plan your new life. The aftermath was quiet, but the air still thrummed with the echo of his scream, of Chloe's stunned silence. They left shortly after, Mark still muttering threats under his breath, Chloe looking utterly defeated, clinging to his arm. I didn't watch them go. I didn't need to. I heard the door click shut behind them. And then, silence. The apartment was mine again.
Trulimine.
The silence felt different now. It wasn't the empty silence of loss, but the quiet of possibility, of control regained. I walked through the rooms, the same rooms that had felt like a cage for weeks. The light was still soft, the furniture still there, holding its memories. But the ghosts felt less potent now. The pain was still a deep ache, a scar that would take time to heal. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. The marriage was over. A decade of my life was gone, shattered by his choices. The victory felt cold, sharp, not warm and comforting. There was a profound sadness beneath the surface of my vindication. Winning didn't erase the hurt, but it did change the narrative. I wasn't the discarded wife, the victim left homeless and adrift. I was the woman who stood her ground, who fought back with intelligence and quiet strength, who reclaimed her space and her life. I picked up the papers from the coffee table, the deed, the notice to vacate. They were just pieces of paper, but they represented something powerful. They represented my independence, my foresight, the quiet strength I had built within myself, perhaps without even realizing it, over the years. I had planned for future with Mark, yes, but I had also, in my own way, planned for my future, independent of anyone else. And that planning, that independent foundation was what saved me. The apartment is quiet now. My space. My sanctuary once more. It's not filled with the sounds of shared life, not yet. But it's not filled with the ghosts of betrayal either. It's a blank canvas, waiting for the next chapter. Waiting for a story written entirely by me. The path ahead is still uncertain, still daunting. Healing isn't linear. But I'm not standing still. I'm not lost. I'm here, in my home, grounded, ready to build anew. This time, the foundation is solid. It's mine. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for what's yours, or rebuild from scratch, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.